Okay, so playing as black and bringing the bishop into the innocuous position. One key thing I've been focusing on is the elements of the weakness of the doubled pawns. So if you get opportunity to double the pawns, then go for it. And if you have the opportunity to maintain that doubling of the pawn position, then go for it. And seeing as the bishop has not defended the knight, we can actually go for a doubling the pawns in the early part of this game. So we draw first blood. But as we know, you can turn it into a strength by owning the files, etc. But we are looking at it in genuine terms of, let's establish what is the weakness. The weakness is doubling the pawns. It's harder for the opponent to get a solidified attack going, especially in the end game with doubled pawns. Obviously it depends how many pieces you've got on the board, but in the general sphere of things, it's a weakness. And this is why the opponent's not taken our knight just yet, because obviously the queen is supporting our knight. So these are types of things that the chess players kind of understand, you know, going for the double pawns. This is why the cats are in pieces, because, oh, it's doubling the pawn, it's causing a weakness. It's how you build from that point, obviously. Now they're looking to try and get their pawns back in line, really. And we're trying to avoid bringing their pawns back in line. There's certain circumstances where you will. If it's going to be worse for you in the long run if you don't, say, capture the piece. So we're x-raying through to their queen. We're hoping the queen moves out the way so we can double the pawns. But if we capture the knight, the queen's probably going to take. I'm just thinking there's a bit of activity that's going to be supported by their knight if the pawn takes in the centre. So I think we may just want to be taking the knight off the board, and plus it's also supporting their bishop, and if our knight moves out the way, sorry, if the pawns start putting pressure on their bishop, we can condense some pressure towards their king. So they're attacking us, making us ask a question. I think the answer is taking the knight off the board, because, like we said, the centre looks like he's going to start attacking, and I want to take any supporting pieces off. And they actually take with the pawn. So it opens up space in front of their king. So they have got two sets of weaknesses now. And always bear in mind, players can play like that because, you know, it establishes the open files or half open files in front of people's kings, like in case in point this here. So what we're looking to see if we can take advantage of this now and push onto their bishop. Hopefully we can make space for our rooks or our queens on the half open file towards their king. So a smaller piece attacking a high piece usually can't be wrong, so the bishop moves out of the way. key thing is really about focusing now on what is the target area. It really is the G file at this moment in time, and potentially the H file as well, targeting towards the king. So putting more pressure onto the bishop, getting more pieces towards their king area seems to be quite fruitful at this moment in time. There's nothing major happening on the board, but we're establishing pieces in front of their king and trying to utilize the doubled pawns against the opponent as a type of weakness. If the knight can jump in front of those pawns, then we can get a blockade with our pawns, just jamming them in further. As you can see, their queen is not quite in the game yet, or it doesn't have access to get into the game, apart from attacking the B pawn. It's always for the B pawn. Always remember that. The B pawn is always going to be attacked. It's got no protection on it at this moment in time, but it's easily defended in this type of position. So I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. Probably the rook that's going to probably start attacking it, because there's a lot of activity. Looks like it's going to start occurring towards the king side. So I think the queen is going to try and jump in and help. Well, the king's moved off the way. It's feeling there's something there, because they've created it in a sense, you know, this half open file. But we're not interested in bringing their pawns back in line. As we said, sometimes it's good to do it, sometimes not. So bringing the knight up, it's acting as a blockade, blocking those pawns. At the same time, there's a bit of pressure on the pawn in front of the king. If we can get a king or a rook attacking that pawn, that would be quite nice. How we do it? Queen could move up and just attack the pawn. We just go to d7, but does it win us anything? We've got to be mindful of this pawn on the f, because the bishop is targeting that, x-raying through. All the while, our focal point really is on trying to put some pressure towards their king. Our other knight is just sat doing nothing at this moment in time, but maybe that needs to be brought in the game later. Remove the king, then we can push the pawn up, so the f pawn, so that it's not getting in the way. And maybe we can start pushing, going onto the H file with our pieces, the rooks, the queens. Lots of maybes, lots of if buts, choices to make. So as we said, looking to champion the G file, but we have to be careful. We need to move the king off of the line, because we'll end up being in a pin and our pawn won't be able to take the bishop. So we need to move the king out of the way, off of the line. Going onto the white square is not too bothersome at the minute, because their white square bishop's not going to have a diagonal. So they're moving very quickly, and we're fairly happy with potentially owning the H or the G to get some pressure on their king, win some time attacking their king, and maybe positionally we might be able to grab a few pawns. But that's a long time coming. I think the basics are just establishing that either the G or the H may be at task, but we need to move the pawn out of the way first. We don't need to, but moving the pawn out of the way so that the bishop can't take it. But bearing in mind, the rook can't actually go to g8 because the bishop is there, so it can go to h8 once things start kicking off. So now they're feeling good that they're taking the knight off the board, but now we've got some nice access towards their king area. Not straight away, and we can build up to it quite nicely. Which pawn do we take with? We get more pawns facing towards the king, the better. So I think I'm coming from the center to the far ranks files. So we've got a nice cluster of pawns aiming towards their king area. Nice team. Still maintaining blockages of their double pawn. Got to be careful here. He's got a discover check once that pawn moves down onto our king. So I think simply moving the king out of the way is going to work. So they're probably going to feel a bit of pressure with that pawn. Well, they've taken with the pawn. So this is definitely going to give us access towards their king, because we could undouble our pawns, or we could half star shade them and give access for our rooks and our queens attacking their king. And I think the second option is the better option for myself. For the H pawn capturing the G pawn, moving the king onto the G file, and going simple potatoes, just getting the rook up on the H file. No guarantees of anything, but it's giving the opponent something to think about. In this type of build up to the end game as well, with the sort of lockdown nature of things, or jammed in nature, their bishop may not survive. That's what we're hoping, and maybe the flexible knight will work a lot better. So take it inwardly, and then, as we said, just sitting the king on G7, and getting the rook onto the H, getting the queen onto the H, and maybe getting the other rook onto the H. Not sure what this rook move is, because it doesn't really seem to be, it can't move from there, can it? So it gives us time to actually move the king without too much worry. I don't see where it's mobilizing from. Anyway, so yeah, it gives us that time to attack the king, but obviously the king's going to move. But we can still continue up trying to own the H file with the rooks and getting the queen behind, and then maybe establishing an attack that way. Always remembering the B pawn is always going to get attacked, so we're always mindful that if it does get attacked, it's easily defended, just pushing the pawn onto B6, unless there's something glaringly different that I've missed. So we're just following all the stuff that we just calculated there at this moment. Rook owning the file. Like I say, I really don't know what this rook on G4 is doing. And the king is running like we've said. And we think we're smooth and getting the queen off the board. But then the rook that we said has no place being there in the center can come back and defend. So it's one of those where you have to be careful. We can go and support the rook with our queen, but then there's no more supporting after that, because we would lose out tempo wise. See what I mean? So if the king moves out the way, if the rook doesn't take, then so when the king moves, if we bring our queen across, then he's got two pieces that will be able to defend. In fact, three pieces, because the rook's going to take, and then our queen's not taking back because we lose the queen. So we'll have to take the rook off the board. And the king does move. So that's at this point here. I've seen this type of thing many times in many games of chess, where people do the move order wrong because they get a bit giddy. So things like moving the queen up, thinking they're getting this second rook on the file, but they lose out because that rook can take the rook, and then our queen would take their rook and the queen would take the queen. Smallest of move order type situations. Yep, so capturing the rook is pretty safe, and we can still follow the angle of getting the queen up and getting the rook behind the queen and see if we can put pressure on their queen, see if there's an exchange going. Because in the back of my head I'm thinking with a flexible knight, maybe their bishop is going to feel a bit jammed in the later part of the end game. Might not be a fact, but I'm just thinking that. They're looking to do the same thing, looking to put pressure on our queen. Again, this is that move order type situation, so we can bring our rook now. So they're too late to the party. If their rook then did come and attack our queen, they would lose their rook. And like we said, always for the B pawn, but it's easily defended. It's taken a moment just to see, well, okay, this simple movement of pushing the pawn, which was always going to happen, does it look different now that it's actually started? What's this white square bishop doing? Yeah, there's nothing meaty there. Just thinking that the space on in front of the king, our king looks like it feels like it's safe, but there's a bit of space if somebody could get down and get the C pawn and A pawn, you know, on like D7 or E7 or whatever it is. But for now, it doesn't look like there's anything that can do that. Our knight really needs to get into the game now. I think it needs to probably get to the E7 at some point. But we need to try and see if we can exchange the queen. So I think our next move will be looking to entice the queen a little bit and see what's going to happen. Hey, they're beating me to the punch. But I can kind of see why they've done it, because it is attacking that area that we were just talking about in terms of attacking our king. So if we don't take the queen, then obviously he's going to come down and wreak havoc. He'll be getting the knight for free, etc. And this is a case where undoubling the pawns, I think, is a wise thing. Just basically taking the queen off the board. Does give us access towards their king, because we can bring the rook up and attack the pawn. I think taking the queen off the board is going to be the thing. Yeah, we've got to protect the king area. The rook can come up and attack the pawn. I think then once the pawn attacks, then we can bring our rook up to attack the king. Put a bit of pressure on the king, and we could probably swing over and attack the f pawn. It's just a quick calculation, but it seems a bit positive. Just bring the rook up. Attack the g pawn, pawn drops down, f, put a check on the king, swing across onto f2, and then we're on the f pawn. Oh no, wait, he could have just gone E1. We wouldn't have been able to get that. Oh no, hold on. His bishop can go to E2. Ah, okay, fair enough. Nothing too meaty there then. Suppose we could get a draw. If it goes E2, then we can just bounce backwards with the rook, and I don't know. What? No, they haven't. We can take the pawn. We should be able to get the other pawn as well. Oh, mind you, the bishop can come and defend, can't it? Maybe? Yeah? What if it does? We just move the rook. Oh, the king has blocked the bishop's attacking area. We might as well attack the pawn. He can't defend this now. Okay, so they're going to try and come around the back. I'm not really seeing anything apart from if they push the e pawn, the bishop's supporting the h7, the rook comes down, puts the check on, the king can dance up and down, can bring the knight into the game. Well, we've got time to do that. So we can capture this pawn in the meantime. I don't think it's too major, the rook coming down there. I don't think there's any checkmate type things. Can put a check on the king here. So this is just, we have 2 passed pawns at the minute, which is good, but we don't need to rush anything because they're going to be coming down and attacking us. Knight needs to get in the game. I think the magic square for the knight is e7, so we can mobilize our king and get a defense around the knight, because it's inevitable we're going to get attacked with the h7 attack. I was thinking of just sacrificing the rook and taking the bishop off the board, but that doesn't seem too meaty. Probably could give us a draw, because we do have 2 passed pawns that they're going to have to defend. We've got the knight down now. We're waiting for this pawn push on e, so the rook can come and attack the king, and they have done. So at least we're aware of it. I don't really see that there's any major problems for us, so I think we can simply just take the pawn off the board in the center, kind of undoubling the pawn. So if we take with the f pawn, then we've got that out of the way, and then the rook comes down, puts checks on the king. Just let them punch themselves out. I don't think there's any checkmate type stuff. Looking at the bishop diagonals, the knight's covering the e5, so the king just drops down to f8, rook comes back down again, we go to f7, backs it again, we go to e6, backs it again, we go to d7, go to d7, yep, still protecting the knight and stopping any attacks on the c and the a pawns. The bishop can come and attack, but we do have the pawn that can defend, and the knight is defending, as we said, the f5. So yeah, a simple capture of the pawn with the f pawn, that should work for us. Even though I've already done the calculation, just checking to make sure that everything is still the same. So it's a simple calculation of letting them punch themselves out. But at each stage of the calculation, I'm learning to just, well, does it look the same? Is it any different? Can you do something slightly better? that's where we got to with the calculation. That all seemed to fall into place quite nicely. Next stage thing for us now is we're thinking, depending on where the bishop goes back, we're trying to get these passed pawns up as best possible to put some pressure on. But they do have a pawn that is unprotected, which is on the c. So we should be able to take that off the pawn without any real worries. Everything seems to be protected as best possible. There's only the a pawn that's a bit loose. But I think we can grab a pawn with the rook and look to potentially put a check on the king. I'm just thinking, if we put a check on the king can drop down onto the f. So we could push the e pawn, e4, to stop the king from being able to push down onto the f pawn. But then they'll just gobble up the pawns then with the king. Yeah, I don't think taking the pawn is the wise thing to do. I think pushing the pawn up first, stopping the king from actually being able to push down. Nothing worse than a king that gobbles up all the pawns. So at this point in time, it should be pretty straightforward in terms of conversion. Just maintaining pressure towards the king with the pawns, with the rook, and eventually the knight, in order to gain some type of promotion with one of these passed pawns. At this point, the opponent left the game.